Hi guys, welcome to another Baking Gems Q&A with myself. I hope you're all keeping well. The usual, just give it a minute or two just to allow a few people to join and we will get kick-started. We have some people in already. If you can give me a little wave or a little thumbs up to let me know that you can hear me loud and clear, that would be amazing. I hope that you're all well. I feel like I haven't been on here in ages, so I'm excited to get back this evening. We have some absolutely brilliant questions this evening about, it's just some baking. Ava, you can hear me, that's amazing. Thank you so much. We have some amazing questions in just about questions about what went wrong in baking. But again, any baking questions that you have, I love to hear from you all. So please just pop them down in the comment section below. I have the phone pretty close to me here, so I won't be squinting too much. So this evening we are talking about what went wrong, mishaps when you're baking. So I'm sure it has happened to everyone, myself included. So I would absolutely love to hear from you. Firstly, for those tuning in, again, I always do this out of pure nosiness. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. If you could let me know in the comment section below, that'd be brilliant. Still holding out. I think South Africa was the furthest we've had to date. So I don't know if we'll top that one this evening. But yes, I think we have a few in now. So we might get started. I have my laptop set up over here. So I'll just be looking at the questions that we have in. So we have about 11 questions in this evening, which is really good. Again, please add to those questions if you are tuning in and you have any baking questions whatsoever. Please just fire them into the comment section below and I will do my damnedest, my very best to answer them all for you. We have some really good questions in that the guys gathered over on the Gem page over the weekend. So lots of people were asking lots of baking questions. So again, guys, I'd love to know where you're all tuning in from. You can let me know in the comment section and then we'll get started shortly. I have my cup of tea and one of the questions involves cookery books. So I was rooting, I've got some up here. I was rooting for some of my favourites. I'm going to go through some of them this evening as well. You're all nice and quiet. You're hopefully relaxed for the evening. People are probably just in the door. So if you're all very shy, so if there's no questions coming in, hi Aggie. If you have no questions coming in, then I will get started. And again, guys, this is a live stream, so we can have a little bit of interaction, a bit of fun here. Any questions that you may have. If you're watching this on playback, do pop your little questions into the comment section and either myself or any of the Gem team will get back to you and we can answer any of your baking questions if you are watching this back in replay. So as I was saying, you all gave in some really good baking. We've all had those mishaps where our sponge has sunk in the center or we've overcooked a creme anglaise, or even if it's cupcakes that they turn out too dry. So if there's any of those little kind of things that you kind of constantly hit up against when you are baking and you're kind of wondering what is the best approach, do fire them into the comment section and I'll keep an eye on them here. So just while we're waiting for a few more to come in here, I might get started here. So we have, Ava has asked a question here. She shared her worst baking mishap, which is brilliant because we're all in the same boat here. If I had €1 for every time that I overcooked a pavlova or burnt a sponge, I would be living in the Bahamas, retired at this point. So it's all a part of baking and getting comfortable with your kitchen and your oven. But Ava has said here, she forgot to add flour. She looked into the oven and there was just batter dripping out of the tin. She is asking any good baking books you could recommend, or what is my favourite baking book. Ava, there's nothing like it, the fear of putting something into the oven and then realising as in like, oh, sugar. Did I put in the sugar? Did I put in the baking powder? And you question everything. We were taught in college always when you were weighing ingredients that you work from left to right or right to left, whatever way, generally if you're right-handed or vice versa, that you would have each ingredient weighed up, and as corner as you put it into the bowl, you put the dish on the other side. So at least at the end, you've got the dishes over this side and you're like, okay, yeah, I did add the flour. Yes, I did add the sugar. Because if you're grabbing stuff and weighing, which I think a lot of us do sometimes, you can forget to put in ingredients. So that is absolutely normal. And I too have forgotten to put flour into cakes and have wondered why they're so soft looking. So Ava has just asked here about my favourite books and what are my favourite books and if I have any. I have so many books. That is definitely that's definitely something I need to sort out. I can't not go anywhere but I buy a cookery book. I definitely probably have up on 100, if not over 100 books, I'd say at this point, that I've just gathered over the years in secondhand shops mostly, or if there has been books that I've been waiting to come out. I was only down in Dingle at the weekend just gone at the Blossom Heron Awards, and I picked up a book down there as well. I just love the inspiration, not only pastry but savoury as well. So we're going to get into books here. So I'm going to show you probably one of the older books in my, well actually no, I have older ones. I think I even have my mum's old home economics book in there somewhere. But this was one that I remember at the very beginning of my career being like, I really want that book. I really looked up to the chef and I saved my money and I bought it. And this is, I'm not sure if Instagram, yeah, it's the other way around. So this is the Gary Rhodes Sweet Dreams. And his hair is styled just like the lemon meringue pie. And this was probably one of the first books that I bought that I actively went out and looked for. Looking back on it now, they're all quite simple recipes, but they're staples. And that's what I love about it. Even now, there's just, even when it's like, look at this, steamed sponge puddings. Absolutely gorgeous. But really classic recipes and ones that I do reach for. Not all the time, but if I'm just looking, sometimes you get caught up with the whole Instagram and TikTok and all of those things, and everything moves at such a pace that sometimes it's nice just to go back to basics. And what else do we have in this one here? There's lovely tarts here, treacle tart, crispy upside down apple tarts, creme brulees, upside down fake puddings. How amazing does that look? I could do an Instagram live just solely talking about cookery books. That was my first one and I still love it. It brings back really good memories of when I started off in college and stuff. Next one is more of a Bible. It's a really thick book here, and it's Le Cordon Bleu, and it's the Pastry School cookbook. This one I absolutely love. This is like a modern take on lots of recipes, where you have like the basic core recipe, and it just shows you different ways to present them, whether it's little tarts. But what I love about this, it actually gives you pictured images of how to create the recipe. I'm just going to lift this up here, it weighs a ton. You can see here, like it goes through each step of the recipe and actually shows you what needs to be done. And again, these are just absolutely phenomenal desserts. Like they're real showstoppers. Simple kind of cakes, but then I'm just trying to get one here, a nice one. They're all nice, that's the problem. That's a nice kind of coffee loaf cake. Here we go. So even for eclairs, how beautiful do they look? And again, when you flick over, it should have, yes, it has your pictures here. So again, it's a really good book for if you're unsure on the method and how to make recipes and stuff. This is a real favourite of mine, the Cordon Bleu pastry school cookbook. I actually, would you believe, went to France and I spotted this in a bookshop in oh no, maybe it was Porto, I think, actually in Portugal, and I ended up carrying this home in my suitcase, where other people were sneaking in probably cigarettes and wine and all the good stuff that you take on holidays. I was bringing home cookery books. So that is a really, really good one. I've loved that one for years. And probably my latest addition to the family is Bread Song. And this is such a beautiful bread book, and this is Kitty and Al Tate. If you're on Instagram a lot, you really should. Not that Kitty needs me to recommend her, she's got so many followers, but it's a beautiful book. It's not only about baking, but it's actually about stories as well. Lots of storytelling, but just glorious recipes, like overnight focaccias. So it does specialise in bread. It's a beautiful book, and as I said, not just only a cookbook, but it tells the story of how they got into baking, and Kitty's story and her dad. It's really, really nice. Guinness soda bread there. What else do we have? And these are all sourdoughs here. What's this one here? This is a ultimate sourdough bread. So again, beautiful photography again. But again, this one is just bread baking, and that is my latest purchase. Really, really like this one. So again, if you are looking for a nice bread book, that would be my top 3 books. So I have my Gary Rhodes throwback to the early 90s. And then the Cordon Bleu Pastry School baking book is if you just want something a little bit fancier, that's a really nice book. And then Bread Song as the baking book. So they are my top 3. So many more. It's actually impossible to say my top 3, but they would be definitely up there in my 3 favorite books. Okay, next question. Again, guys, don't be afraid to say hello and let me know where you're tuning in from. I always love to know where you're curled up and watching this at home, or if you're still at work, or what you're up to. I am just doing questions about baking mishaps and what went wrong and things like that. So Susie has a question, and Susie says, I have white flour clumps in the sponge cake. I used a spatula to try and gently fold the flour into the egg mixture, but the white spots are still there when the cake is done baking. So I suppose what Susie's looking for here as well, I think that has happened to me so many times as well, that you sieve your flour, or you mix your flour through the sponge, especially if you're making like a Genoese, which is a much lighter sponge. You don't want to over mix it, and you can have little flecks of flour. So there are 2 things that you can do with this. What I would say to you is double sieve your flour. So take your plain flour, self-raising, depending on what the recipe is, and sieve it, and then sieve it again. That way you're just removing any of the clumps. So a double sieve definitely helps, and that will help aerate and keep the cake as light as possible. Also, if you have a quite a large whisk, I find if you fold it through with the whisk, now you're not whisking it, beating it, knocking the air out. So you're going through the exact same motions as you would with the spatula as you fold in. But because there are the additional prongs there, that does mix it, and it can help mix the flour in a little bit more. Again, you're not whisking it to knock the air out. You're merely just kind of folding the flour through with a larger whisk, one that has nice space between the little spokes. And that is another way of just helping the flour incorporate that little bit better. So I hope that helps, Susie. Question 3 here, this is in from Liz. There's usually a crack on top of my banana bread cake, even though I don't open the oven. What am I doing wrong? This is such a popular question, and I think that not only relates to banana breads, but also to lemon drizzles, brown breads. A lot of breads do crack, and a lot of cakes crack along the top. So there are a number of factors here that you need to take into consideration. Personally, for me, the crack on top doesn't really offend me. For me, it looks homemade, you know. So, but if you don't like the crack on the top of your banana bread or lemon drizzle, that's 100% understandable. I think it adds a little bit of character. Sometimes it can be a little bit of a nightmare when you're trying to carve it and it breaks, but oven temperature, that's number 1. So if you want to try and eliminate that crack that's on top of your loaf when you're baking, your oven can be too hot, okay? So reduce the oven temperature as well. What happens is that obviously the sides of your cake, banana bread for example, is coming into direct contact with your bread tin, and obviously that's hot, and the center of the cake doesn't cook as fast. So what happens is that the outside of the cake cooks faster than the inside, and then obviously as the inside of the cake rises up, then it cracks the top of your loaf. So your oven temperature, you can lower that as well. Ingredient temperature also plays a key role in baking. So if you're using eggs from the fridge, or if you're using butter from the fridge, or even your bananas, if you're making banana bread from the fridge, I would say always have all of your ingredients at room temperature. It just, for me personally, you get a more consistent bake every time. Unless you're making a pastry and the recipe calls for cold cubed butter, that's a-okay. But if you're making a cake or sponge or something, try and use room temperature ingredients. Don't overwork the batter. So if you're over mixing the batter, so your banana bread again, if you're looking at that, what happens is that you're working the gluten that's in the cake. And the more you work the gluten, just like when you're cooking a steak, it becomes quite tight. And it just strengthens the gluten in there, and that can cause the cake to peak on you as well. So overworking the batter is also another reason that it can peak on you as well. Your mix being too wet. So if you have a really wet mix, again, that's kind of going back to the first point of the outside of the cake is going to cook first. That comes into contact with the tin, and the center of your cake then obviously doesn't. So if your batter is very wet, it can actually cause the cake to rise and then split on the center. So just keep that in mind as well. Another thing is that your cake tin could be too small. So if you're putting way too much batter into a loaf tin, and then as it rises, it has nowhere to go. So eventually it just peaks up on top. So if your cake tin is narrow for the volume of batter that you're putting in, that can also cause your loaf to peak on top and crack as well. So there's a couple of factors in there. So have a little play around. Again, just to recap, you're looking at the oven temperature being too hot, so reduce that slightly. Ingredient temperature, always have your ingredients at room temperature if at all possible. Don't overwork your batter. And then your batter, if it's too wet, you might need to look at the recipe. And if your cake tin is too small, that can also cause it to crack on top as well. Trish has asked the next question. Again, guys, I know I've said it before. If you have any questions whatsoever, please do pop them into the comment section and I will answer them straight away for you. I'm jumping back on to Trish here has asked, my chocolate ganache turns oily and grainy. What am I doing wrong? That is such a good question. Chocolate ganache is not as easy as it is made out to be. And that can boil down to a number of factors. Some of them being is in the quality of the chocolate and also how hot you are heating up your cream as well. So what's happening is there, Trish, is that your ganache is splitting. So it means that the butter solids are splitting up. We have Helen has just asked a question here. Why does my pastry stick to the bottom of the plate with an apple tart? So I'm going to answer that now, Helen, and I'll jump back into Trisha's question. So that's a really good one as well. It just means, Helen, that the liquid that's coming out of your apples softens up the pastry. So naturally, like any pastry lined tart that you make, initially when you take it out of the oven, it's going to be nice and crispy and firm, but the longer you leave it, it can get soft. And that just means that the natural juices that are in your apples kind of ooze out during baking and even after it's baked when it's resting, and that liquid soaks into the sponge on the bottom and that causes it to go soggy over time, and then it sticks to the bottom of your plate. What I would say is maybe change up your variety of apple, one that wouldn't break down as much. So like a Granny Smith, generally speaking, doesn't break down into like a puree, where some apples do. A Pink Lady apple as well doesn't really break down as much. So not as much liquid should be coming out of those. And also if you put your apples in raw, depending on the apple that you're using, that can eliminate that as well. Also give your pastry a good blind bake first if you want to, so you can line your tart with sweet pastry and you blind bake it. Then you put in the apples, cover it with pastry on top and bake it again. That way then your base is getting a good solid bake and it will not stay crispy overnight, because again, regardless of how much you bake it, those kind of soft apples is going to soften up your pastry. So it's just one of those things. Again, I'd say play with the variety of apples that you're using. And if you cook your apples before, some people cook their apples before they put them into an apple pie, just to strain off any excess liquid that's in there. We don't want that at all. And if you're using raw apples, try and pick an apple that doesn't break down like a Bramley apple, kind of cooks into like a sauce, almost like an apple sauce, and a lot of liquid can come out and that can cause it to go soggy. So get an apple that kind of holds its shape a little bit better. So I hope that answers your question. So jumping back onto Trisha's question here, why is her ganache going grainy and lumpy? It's splitting, okay? So I notice as well with certain chocolates, the higher cocoa butter you get, the higher you go. So I would say anything above 55% dark chocolate. If you go up to a 60, a 70 or 80, there's more cocoa butter in there. And I would find that does split a lot faster. So that's just something to keep in mind. If you are trying to melt a dark chocolate, I'd be going for one that sits at around the 50-55% mark. I find that does melt the best for me personally. Also, if you're putting the cream and chocolate together and melting that over a pot of simmering water or in the microwave, if you overheat it, you will split the mix and it will go lumpy on you. So that's something to keep in mind. And also, if you're heating up your cream separately and pouring your cream over the chocolate, if your cream is boiling hot, then it will split and it can curdle as well, just with the high fat that's in the chocolate as well. So a couple of things just to be careful is over mixing it as well. When you put your cream in, over mixing, overheating can cause your ganache to split. So what I would say is, if you're using the chocolate and cream, heat up your cream, not bring it to the boil, but let it sit and let it just cool for a minute or two. Then pour it over your chocolate and just leave it. Walk away from it. After about 5 minutes, come back and then stir it through. But if you're going to mix it and mix it and mix it, you're over mixing the ganache and it will split and it'll go oily and grainy on you, and it's not the nicest. What I would say to you at that point, if you ever split a ganache, you can still put it into the fridge and it'll still firm up, and then you can make chocolate truffles from it, and you can just roll those into little circles and dust them with cocoa powder, and they're a beautiful a way to have them as well. Margaret's comment here, water gets into it. Yeah, Margaret, that's not really for splitting though, that's more for seizing. So there's a difference in having like an oily chocolate ganache, where if water does get in, and that's absolutely 100% valid, it more or less seizes up the mix, so it goes rock hard on you. So the same if it's even straight up chocolate or a ganache, by adding or getting water or moisture in there, it actually seizes up the mix and it goes like concrete, where the question is more about splitting. So splitting your ganache and having it going grainy is about overheating the mix or overheating your cream. So either way, both of those you definitely want to avoid. So next we have here, question is, how do I know when the right time to stop whipping my cream? 1 minute it's soft and I turn away, and the next second it's curdled. 100%. Again, if I had €1 for every time that I have curdled cream, I would be living in the Bahamas, retired. We've got the question here, caramel square next to chocolate goes slightly white on top. Yes, I will touch on that one, Natasha, in 1 second about the caramel squares. That's a really good one. So your cream, the most important thing to factor in when you're whipping cream is to use cold cream. Do not use cream that's at room temperature, because it runs a higher risk on splitting on you. So again, in hotels and restaurants that I've been trained in over the years, we would have always chilled our bowls. So if you're using a stand mixer or whatever, we used to always put our bowls into the fridge and then whisk up our cream, and then the bowl stays nice and cold, and it stops the cream from splitting on you. It will eventually, naturally, but it just slows the process down a bit. So cool bowl is ideal, as is using cold cream. Very, very important. What I have here as well. Yes, so what I would say to you, just until you get familiar with it as well, is whisk your cream until you get to about soft peak, and then if you're a little bit unsure, finish it by hand, because it's like an avocado. 1 minute it's perfect, or 1 minute it's underripe, perfect, and then it's gone black in seconds. So it's the same with cream, it just takes a couple of seconds and it's gone. So bring your cream to a soft peak and finish it with a hand whisk, and that way then you have better control over how thick it is. So that's just something to factor in, okay? So just jumping on to Natasha's question here about the caramel square next day chocolate goes white on top. So that's called blooming, and that is when your chocolate blooms, and that can come into a number of factors. Again, that's down to the quality of chocolate that you're using. So if you're using a cheaper quality of chocolate, it can run the risk of blooming. It also happens when chocolate comes into contact with sugar. So by pouring your chocolate onto obviously a caramel, if your caramel squares, that can cause your chocolate to bloom, and also a change in temperature. So if you have your chocolate ganache out at room temperature and you put it into the fridge and it's cooler, it kind of goes dusty and white on top. So what you can do there is just either turn your grill on for a couple of seconds and just flash it underneath it for a few seconds, and that kind of gives it a nice sheen on top. If you have a blowtorch at home, not a lot of people have blowtorches, but if you do and you blowtorch the top of it, that also removes the blooming. But again, flashing it in a hot oven or under a grill for 2-3 seconds will kind of almost remelt the chocolate, and that causes the blooming on the chocolate to disappear. What I have found before is if you're using a cheaper variety of chocolate, if you add in a tiny drop of oil, so like a vegetable oil or sunflower oil, to your chocolate, that does reduce it somewhat in blooming. Again, I can't say that happens all the time, because I don't know what variety of chocolate that you're using or the conditions that you're baking in, but if you add a little bit of oil in there, it especially for a cheaper brand of chocolate, it does kind of help it along and stops blooming a little bit. Okay. Where are we going? That's the whipped cream question done. Now, question 6. Do I use cold eggs for baking, or room temperature is better? Again, I touched on this earlier on in a question. For me personally, when you're baking cakes and stuff, I always use room temperature. That's room temperature eggs, room temperature butter. Obviously, we talked about cream there. Cream is best whipped cold. And then if you're making certain types of pastry, they asked you for cubed cold butter. What I would say is look at the recipe that you're using and try and follow the method, if at all possible, that the person who has created that recipe has done, and they'll kind of let you know. But generally speaking, room temperature butter, room temperature eggs, unless the recipe states otherwise, for best results. Next question in here. I doubled up my carrot cake recipe and the cake didn't come out well. I left it in the oven for 10 minutes longer, but the middle was still wet and the top was burned. Yes, see, this is something you need to be careful of when you go to change a recipe. So the person who creates the recipe, whether it's the cook, chef, whomever that person is, like myself, I would like to think that they would test every single recipe. So every recipe that you see on the GEM website with all of the recipes that are up there, they are being tested by me minimum of 2 times before I sign off on the recipe. And that's just how I work, because I know how frustrating it is when you follow a recipe and it doesn't work. So the recipes that we do together with Gem, they are tried and tested minimum of 2 before they go live onto the website, onto my page and Gem's page. And that's something that that is non-negotiable for me and for Gem, because consistency and quality is number 1 for us. So what I would say to you is, if you are going to change someone's recipe, if you can reach out to them and ask them a question. If you can't, then I would say just keep in mind that if you're going to double a carrot cake recipe and the recipe calls for it to be made in a 1 pound loaf tin, so if you double that recipe, you're going to need a 2 pound loaf tin, but you're going to have to change the temperature and the time of baking, because if it takes 25 minutes to bake a 1 pound, it may take more than 50 minutes to bake a 2 pound. And if the temperature stays at 180, the top could be burnt and the middle could be undercooked. So by changing and doubling up a recipe, you are then in a way in control of the time and temperature. So it falls back on you to try and figure that out. So what I would say to you is you're going to need to reduce the temperature because you're baking it for longer. So if you leave it in there for a longer period of time, then the cake will be cooked on the outside before it's cooked in the middle, because you're using a larger quantity of batter. So you are going to need to reduce the temperature and you're going to need to increase the cooking time. I can't say for how long because I don't know what it is that you're going to be baking. But if you see a recipe for a sponge and it's been made in an 8-inch tin, what I would say to you is you can double that recipe, but make 2 8-inches, make 2 tins instead of trying to make 1 big one, because by making 1 big one, you're really changing time, temperatures, all that kind of thing, and you get into a bit of a grey area. So still make them in the 8-inch tins if you can get it, and just do two cakes. Double the recipe, and that means the time and temperature stays the same, and you're guaranteed to get a good bake every time. But I wouldn't double up the recipe and then put all of that batter into an 8-inch, because sometimes what can happen is the cake can rise too much and it can spill over the edges, it can be undercooked in the middle, so there's loads of pitfalls. So what I would say to you is, yeah, if you're making a carrot cake and it's in a 9-inch tin and you want to double that recipe, absolutely fine, but try and bake 2 9-inch tins instead of doing 1 monster cake. It just reduces the risk. I hope that makes sense. How do I make the cookies not spread in the oven? Again, very popular question and a very simple answer. Chill your cookie dough. That is so important if you want a cookie dough that's going to stay the size when you bake it. So again, just like a steak or just like pastry, you have to rest certain ingredients and certain products before or after you bake them, but in this case it's before. So what I would say to you, if you're making chocolate chip cookies and you find that they spread a lot in the oven and they kind of go like pancakes, 1, you're not chilling it long enough, the dough, before you cook it, or 2, it could be the recipe, okay? But if you make a chocolate chip cookie dough and it generally spreads, put it into the fridge for about 2 hours and then you can scoop it out and then bake them in your preheated oven then, and they should spread less on you. If they still spread out and go flat, then it's a recipe issue. It's not a chilling, the chilling time. And the same goes for if you're making really nice biscuits that you cut out of pastry and you have a beautiful circle or a square or rectangle, whatever shape, or even coming up to Halloween now, if you have like a pumpkin shape or a witch's hat or any of those things, if you have a cutter for those and you cut them out, if you put them straight into the oven, they're going to spread and then you're going to get one of these really weird witch's hats, the unidentified flying object syndrome. So what I would say to you is cut out your, just say example, a pumpkin cookie or a witch's cookie, and then chill the biscuits when they're cut. And once they're cut, then when you bake them off, they shouldn't spread as much on you in the oven. So again, key for that is just to chill your dough before you bake it, and that should help you, okay? Next one up here, I made cupcakes the other day and they didn't rise, although I used baking soda. So yes, okay. Firstly, what I would say to you is I probably wouldn't use baking soda for making cupcakes. That maybe, yeah, that could be an issue there. Maybe you meant baking powder. Maybe there are some recipes out there for soda, but generally speaking, whenever I'm making cupcakes, I would either rely on the eggs and the volume of eggs in there for it to rise, or I would use baking powder. So again, just double check your recipes to ensure that you're using the right raising ingredient. And what I would say to you is you also run the risk of baking soda, and contrary to human belief, baking soda and baking powder, they have a shelf life too, like most things, and they will go off. And when bread soda or bicarbonate of soda or baking powder expires, then they're no good. You might as well just be adding in flour to your bake. So again, check that your sell by date, your best before date on your baking powder or bicarbonate of soda is in date. And if you're unsure, if you can't find the best before date on your bicarbonate of soda, a little test to do is put a little tablespoon of vinegar or some sort of acid, so vinegar or lemon juice, into a bowl, and then put half a teaspoon of the bicarbonate of soda into the lemon, and it should start to bubble up and fizz. And if it does that, then your bread soda is working completely fine. So again, what I would say to you is just double check your recipe again. I would say maybe baking powder would be better suited for cupcakes more than soda, because I find sometimes even in certain bakes, if you use too much bread soda, it gives this zingy flavor and it can turn bread green as well. So again, just keep an eye on that, but check your ingredients again. It could be baking powder, and if it's not, then your bread soda could be out of date. That could be a reason for it again. And just to test that your bread soda is actually still good, put half a teaspoon into a drop of vinegar or lemon juice, and the acid should have a reaction. And when it starts to bubble up, then you know that your bicarbonate of soda, your bread soda, is working. Okay. Okay, this one is a very popular one as well. Why do my chocolate chips sink to the bottom of the loaf? Again, that is one that I get all the time. And not only about chocolate chips, but also about cherries for like a lemon Madeira sponge or any of those, okay? What I would say to you is in relation to chocolate, what I would do is, again, I would dust the chocolate in a little bit of flour, and then I would fold that through your loaf tin. And by adding a little bit of flour in, that's going to help it to kind of stick to the batter that's in there and stop it from sinking. Will it stop all of them from sinking? Possibly not, because if your cake mix is quite wet, the chances are if your cake mix is wet, your chocolate chips are heavy, they will sink. So if you're using a very wet cake mix, you can run the risk of your chocolate chips sinking to the bottom. So if your batter is too wet, look at the recipe. You might need to add a bit more flour. And if it stiffens it up a little bit, then your chocolate chips will sit more evenly dispersed throughout your cake. Dust them in flour. That works for the glacé cherries. Try it with your chocolate chips as well. And what I would say to you is use the finer chocolate chips. So Gem's chocolate chips are really, really fine. They're like the little droplet chocolates, and they're not like chunky chocolate that you need to break up. So you can actually use them, and they generally sit better in bakes than the larger chocolate chips. So that is something. Again, just to touch base on the glacé cherry scenario, always make sure that you wash your glacé cherries. So it comes in a little plastic tub. Wash them with warm water just to get rid of that sticky sugar coating that's on them. Pat them dry with a kitchen paper and then toss them in flour. Cut them up as well. Don't put in whole cherries. Quarter them. Dust them in flour, and then they should sit evenly throughout your loaf or your Madeira sponge. Okay. Question 11. This is our final question, guys. So again, if you have any questions, just fire them down below, and I'll answer them before we wrap up this evening's Q&A. So question 11 is, why is the middle of my oat banana pancake staying wet and soggy? Any good recipes you could recommend? So if your pancake, that to me now sounds like some sort of a fancy, healthy pancake, which I know nothing about. it means that the middle of it is still wet. So what I'd be saying to you is you need to reduce the temperature of your pan that you're cooking them on, because what's happening is you're cooking the outside perfectly, but the inside is still undercooked. So what I would say to you is reduce the temperature, and you're going to be cooking it longer and slower. That way it just means that the heat's going to penetrate your pancake, and then the center of your pancake will be cooked fully, and it just runs the risk of having that undercooked pancake. If you're still a little bit unsure, what you can do is then cook them on your pan generally for about a minute or so on each side, turn them over, and you can pop them onto a baking tray and into a preheated oven for maybe 5 minutes or so, and that way then you can ensure that they cook all the way through. Another little tip there to kind of help cook the center of them is by adding in a raising agent, like a little bit of baking powder, and that will aerate the center of the pancake, and it'll just stop it from being doughy and undercooked in the center. So again, reduce the temperature of your pan and cook them slower and longer to ensure that it's cooked in the middle. You can also finish them in the oven, or you can add a raising agent like baking powder, and that will ensure the center of the pancake is cooked. Okay, so that's it, guys. We're flying through them. So we've had, how long are we on there? Just over half an hour. Oh my God, if not longer. That absolutely flew. So we had 11 amazing questions in, and we had some really good questions in from you guys as well. Thank you so much. We covered so much there, from flour clumps to cookbooks to oven temperatures. What else did we talk about there? Whipping of cream, temperature of baking goods, increasing and decreasing recipe sizes. So much covered in tonight's Q&A, and again, some really good questions from you guys as well. So if you have any other questions, as I said, cheers Paula, thank you. If you have any questions at all, as I said, this is a live, so we'll be saving this down. The annoying thing about Instagram is that all of these little questions, thank you Jenny, they disappear after I post this. So if you want to ask the questions again to get an answer on them, please do after the live, and we save this down on the Gem page. And if you are watching this back at a later stage, please feel free to comment underneath this video any baking related questions that we may have touched on tonight, or any questions that you want answered, and either myself or some of the brilliant team over in Gem will get back to you. Okay, but yeah, I think that's all for this evening. No problem at all. Thank you very much. I had a lovely evening. Thank you for taking the time out of your evening to spend it with me here, and always for Gem for allowing me to do this takeover. We have so many exciting things coming up with Gem over. I really want to say it now, but I can't. That's that really annoying thing of saying that something exciting is happening, but we can't just talk about it now. But we have some absolutely amazing content on the way up for Halloween and leading on into the other festive parts of the year, and we also have a really nice kind of bake along series coming up as well. So Catherine, really great, attractive, just wondering how you became brand ambassador with Gem. Well, there's a question and a half, Catherine. I've always loved Gem, and I've been using Gem for years, and it's just a really good partnership between myself and themselves in regards to baking. I bake 24/7, 7 days a week, and I love the brand. It's a household name, so I'm extremely lucky to be working with them, and I absolutely adore creating recipes for them as well. So yeah, I'm the lucky one, I think. But again, guys, I think that's all. Thank you so much for all of your questions. Again, if you are watching this on playback, please do fire your questions down below, and I will answer them myself, or some of the guys in Gem will answer them for you. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and we'll be talking to you really soon. And do keep an eye out for some really cool content coming up. As I said, we have some really cool video recipes coming up, and a really nice festive bake along series coming up as well. So tons of exciting things on the horizon, and yes, we'll talk to you all soon. Okay, enjoy the rest of your evening. Okay.